Not to wax too philosophical, but the wheels, they do keep turning. Left unattended, my brain has a tendency to kind of go off on its own, think its own thoughts. Which got me to thinking, am I still going about this little guy the wrong way? Is the tendency to just go straight to here and try to go up it? Is, is that the best way to do things? I mean, I have a fairly large area, and not all of them are defined by how good the tires are underneath the rig. Some places depend on the capability of the vehicle. Like on this one, I had to push the upper front links out 3 millimeters in order to get the servo to stop hitting the chassis, which is something I didn't think ahead for with conscious or unconscious brain, that when switching straight rod ends to curved ones, while the total length might stay the same length, it's a triangle now, I guess. So sometimes it pays to just sit and watch something quiet, because that's where cleaner thoughts will come from, like putting on a proper geometry front drag link that allows me to get full steering throw without the tires rubbing on the front lower links. This generally helps, which meant that I had to move the front lower links inboard and go to the SSD style rims flipped essentially inside out, which actually only gives about 5 millimeters more offset on each side. So it looks, normal, but the clearances are much better. There's still that little bit of body rub, but these are 100 millimeter tall tires on a car that came with 90 millimeter. What it can do now is modulate really well. It has more bump than one would anticipate from an 80 turn motor, and it's just more so even than before. It's just a genuine pleasure to drive. I'm like actively going after lines now. Like, it's the fun of it is, can I make it up this obstacle in a rig not supremely well suited to going up this obstacle, on tires that have just enough grip. Not too much. They're not the worst Amazon tires you can buy. You cut about half the lugs off of your front tire, and you've kind of got something. Then, if you're me, you spend every minute wheeling it, trying to train your brain that the ground clearance on this is the least of any vehicle that you own. Sometimes it feels like I'm driving a sedan. And once you get once you come to an acceptance of the idea of trying to drive a Honda Accord up a shattered brick wall, then you can really have a good time. It's still a bit of a tippy little thing. I think even with a little more track width, it's easily as tall as it is wide. But it's super fun to wheel, and it deserves shiny things. So you get yourself the metal sleeve off of a ancient 12-turn Traxxas Titan. You take that metal sleeve to the brass buff and wheel and shred the decal off of it, and take that crusty sleeve and chuck it up on the lathe and hit it with an ancient bottle of nano polish. And that will leave you with an appropriately shiny bauble. But it's not just shiny. I mean, it works too. We learned that if you put a torque sleeve on a 540, it has a tremendous amount of torque. So here is a visualization of the drag brake of an 80-turn 540 motor with a torque sleeve on it. Basically, the drag brake will outbrake the tires now, and that's kind of where I want to live. I want to be where the slide is because of the tire and not because of the brake giving way. And then you just kind of enjoy it, and you drive the little guy in places where, I don't know, he should and shouldn't be. Like, if the wood discs cut out of the massive fallen tree in your yard are the height of the rig's headlights, you're going to have to use a lot of reverse to get up to the top of this. I mentioned in the last one that he's not particularly a bumper. He's better at the slow crawl than the power bump. So let's send him to a spot where you basically have to bump to the top of each subsequent obstacle. And you know what? It's still super fun. Like, I don't explicitly care for that $16 Amazon servo. I mean, I think it works fine. My complaint isn't about its performance. I think there's something about the winding, grinding of the gears that sounds cheap to me. Like, functionally, it's the most cutting compliment I could give to it is to say that it's fine. On the other hand, when you have this thing, that's the noise of full throttle. Oh, I also inadvertently learned, after this many years in this hobby, the best imaginable way to set a gear mesh is to own a tremendous amount of pinion gears. I want to run a 22. The way this vehicle is oriented has the most difficult to set gear mesh of any vehicle I've ever encountered, because the motor mounting screws, the top motor mounting screw is basically behind the spur gear. And I replaced the spur gear in this, the stock 88, with a Kimbrough 90 because I love a Kimbrough gear. And it doesn't have the holes in it. So in order to set the gear mesh, you have to loosely set the mesh with one motor screw, then take the spur off, tighten the motor down the rest of the way, and then reinstall the spur. So getting the proper mesh through this method is difficult. So what I learned just this very day is take a 23 tooth and mount it tight, and then slide that 23 off, put a 22 on there, and the mesh is perfect. Then ignore all the conscious and unconscious thoughts you've had and head back to Slick Rock with tires that you've already established are not explicitly suited to going up this obstacle, and try it anyway, because the real proper sense of accomplishment comes from doing something that you think should be impossible. It made it up the backside line at Ancient Kingdom, and that is a thing that I thought this rig would never be able to do. So it might take many deletions of files before I actually make it to the top, but when it actually does make it, and that weight distribution, kind of working out, because in a couple of these moments I thought for sure this thing was going to flip over backwards. But it doesn't really do that. It's done a couple tail stands before, but it has kind of a less cool variant of the Traxxas twist that it can employ to get out of it. A nice plank of a backside can get it pretty firmly planted. Just kind of gotta time it just right, and you can get it back down on the wheels again. Where it does like to flip over is forward. Like, you try to power out of it, and it's too late. This thing descending is kind of terrifying, really. Going up, very smooth, because an 80 turn with low gearing and a purloined torque sleeve, it's got a lot of torque and a lot of low speed control and not a lot of RPM. On the other hand, going downhill in this, or going down a steep descent, I should say, in this, is like running full speed downhill while wearing a heavy backpack. It just feels like the back end wants to pass up the front end. And I guess I have to chalk all of this up to wheelbase, because the numbers are pretty good. I mean, a 3¼ inch CGH from the ground is pretty good, but we are talking about a 9½ inch wheelbase. So even with just 56% front weight, it feels like a lot. I've got rigs that sit in the 60 to 61% front weight area, and this feels significantly more nose heavy. But I don't say that like an attack. Like, that's not a bad thing. It's just tricky. You have to learn to account for that. I mean, the Vanimal and this little fella run the same size wheel and tire, but when you see them side by side, holy wheelbase, Batman, the Vanimal is enormous by comparison. And despite this guy just being a little fella, he only weighs about 10 ounces less than the Vanimal in RTR configuration. Which brings me to wrapping up with the similarities of the two. When I took the Charisma RTR out on the rocks, straight out of the box, it was absolutely terrible. Stock tires were bad, electronics were bad, it didn't want to drive. But I felt like there was something there. And I felt the exact same way when I took the CMX out of the box. I was like, fundamentally, it looks like it should be there. Like, this should be able to crawl rocks. I just have to mentally wrap my head around a 9½ inch wheelbase. And it turns out, not to pat myself on the back too hard, but I was right. I mean, it is a proper rock crawler now. I've taken almost all the speed out of it, but I can drive it on rocks now. I can drive it on logs now. And it is a load of fun. It flips over all the time, but what a great time. And I like the wheels. The wheels look good, the body looks good. This little fella, the MST CMX, he looks good. And you know what, everybody? Thanks for watching.